On your Wednesday episode of Locked On Raptors, 3 weeks remain until the NBA draft, and we still don't have much of a clue of what's going down with Bruce Brown and Gary Trent Jr. We'll get into those big decisions for the Raptors and why those decisions might just get made by a poor free agent class coming up on today's show. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Wednesday, June the 5th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the Hell website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors. And of course, you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. Come be part of our family, would you? It's a great place. We have people talking about fake trades and drafts and all kinds of good stuff. The playoffs, the finals that no one's talking about. The let's hope the asteroid hits finals. All of that going down in the Discord. We'd love to see you in there. It's a great place to come and hang out among friends who like the podcast, who like the Raptors, who want to talk about it in a place that doesn't suck. Link in the description of the podcast. Free to join as always. We'd love to see you there as part of our growing listener family over there. Of course, you can find the show for free wherever you get your podcasts. Follow, subscribe, rate, review on the audio side of things and your app of choosing. Plus, you can go to YouTube and subscribe to the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel. When you do that, hit the notification bell, would you? When you do that, you will get a heads up via push notification every single time the show goes live or premieres, so you'd never miss a second of that action. You can join the live chat and all that good stuff with the sickos over there too. Thanks, of course, for supporting the show as always. All right, on today's show, taking a little break from potential free agent targets, although we'll get into that a little bit, I'm sure, on today's show. Taking a break from the draft to just kind of do a bit of a reset. Take some time to take stock of where things sit with the two most important potential pending free agents for the Toronto Raptors. Of course, Bruce Brown Jr., who has a $23 million team option that the Raptors have been reportedly sort of leaning towards picking up per Doug Smith of the Toronto Star. That's the kind of latest we have on there. There's been very little in terms of sort of insiders with any kind of inkling as to what's going on with Bruce Brown. Would imagine that once the finals get going and we get closer and closer to the draft, some more rumors and slop will make their way out into the ether. And then, of course, Gary Trent Jr., who is a pending unrestricted free agent and is someone who I think, frankly, the Raptors should probably just keep around. We'll get into that over the course of today's show. We'll get into the sort of various options and why this not very good free agent class might just make the Raptors' decisions for them on these guys. There's just not a ton of other alternative roads to go for the Raptors. We'll get into some of the potential ones. And I want to just run through a list of teams to kind of keep an eye on who might be Bruce Brown teams, whether it's on draft night, whether it's after the draft into the offseason as teams try to take stock of the landscape and maybe things change and guys become, teams look at a guy a little more favorably than they did maybe on draft night. We'll get into all that coming up too. But off the top, let's just kind of reset where things sit. The latest reporting from Doug Smith is that the Toronto Raptors are trending towards picking up Bruce Brown's option and intending to trade him. Best laid intentions and all that. You can want to trade a guy, but if you're not getting something tangible in return, obviously the option is still there for the Raptors to just hang on to Bruce Brown into the season. So they have some optionality here, whether they, obviously they can decline it and take the cap space route. And we'll get into why I don't think that's going to happen at this point and why it probably shouldn't happen. And then, obviously, if they pick up the option, there's the option to trade him at the draft in the summer or the next year's trade deadline. Or if you want to take it all the way to the end, let him walk for nothing next summer. You get some salary relief. Maybe you bring him back on a cheaper contract. If he's very good next season, we'll see. It's possible. It's not likely necessarily, but it's out there as an option. There's some optionality there with Bruce Brown. Gary Trent Jr., a little different. They just got to decide to pay him or not, basically. It sounds, all the reporting, again, there's been very little on the status of Gary Trent Jr. It does kind of seem like it's going to be intertwined, as we've kind of always known, with the fate of Bruce Brown and what the Raptors do with him. And obviously, the question with Gary Trent Jr. comes down to money, right? We know what kind of player Gary Trent Jr. is. He was not especially fantastic this past season. He had his ups and downs. He continues to be a very good three-point shooter, though. and a guy who fits quite well with the best players on the Toronto Raptors historically. Always had really good on-off numbers when paired with Scotty Barnes, for example. A little bit less in terms of his fit with the other guys because there's just not a whole lot of sample of it. But with Scotty Barnes, we know Gary Trent Jr. checks the box of, does this player fit with Scotty Barnes, which is the single biggest box every player the Raptors consider bringing into the team needs to check. We also know that Gary Trent Jr. is not a perfect player by any means, and his defense is mostly tied to steals and event creation, and it also often gets him out of position and has the Raptors in rotation on the back end of those gambles when they don't work out. We know that as an on-ball defender, he's not really it. And I think at this point, how many years into his career now? 7 years? 6 years. My bad. I just had a bit of a brain meltdown right there. But either way, 6 years into Gary Trent Jr.'s career, I think it's safe to say he's just never going to become any kind of like playmaking threat. He has averaged below 1.7 assists every season of his career. Actually, sorry, 2 assists a game in 2021-22 was his career high, in a career high 35 minutes. He's just not someone who's going to, create plays for others. He's a trigger man, right? He's a guy who the action swings to, and if he has the ball at the end of an action, if it swings to him in the corner, if it's late in the clock, you don't feel too badly about Gary Trent Jr. launching a shot up for you because he does hit a lot of them, especially from three-point range and from that sort of long mid-range where he's, at least kind of gotten a little bit closer to the rim as far as where his shots come from. He's still not someone who's going to give you rim pressure or anything like that. And so what do you pay a player like that? It's a tough one, right? I do think in general, sort of shoot first non-defenders are one of the most replaceable player types in the NBA. But there's other stuff to consider with Gary Trent Jr. as well. He seems to be a pretty beloved teammate, and replacing him, it's all well and good to say, oh, well, we'll just go get some shooting to replace Gary Trent Jr., but everyone's always after shooting. And when you look at the free agent market, it's just not a loaded class. And so I think things are trending towards Gary Trent Jr. is going to get paid by the Raptors, and they'll just move forward and he'll be on the team. And where does that come around? $15 million a year, $17 million a year. I think the Grayson Allen contract, which was around 17, is probably the high end of what Gary Trent Jr. will get. And I think Grayson Allen last season was better than Gary Trent Jr. That said, it's easy to look better playing next to Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, and all of that. And obviously team context plays into things here. But I do think that, like, if you were paying Gary Trent Jr. 15 to 17 million bucks a year, that's not going to become an albatross contract for you. You're probably paying him to be a starter next year. If you're paying a starter under 20 million bucks, I think that's pretty decent. And as things go forward and they add to the team and things develop, you can have him move into a bench role if you want and not feel like 15 to 17 million bucks a year is some gargantuan salary you just simply must move. Like, you can afford a guy like that on your bench who makes that much money. It becomes valuable for salary matching in trades and things like that as well. I think things are trending towards the move with Gary Trent Jr. being keep him around. And the Bruce Brown thing, if the plan is to, pick up the option, it goes in concert with that, right? The cap space plan falls apart if you pick up Bruce Brown's option. They can get to about 30 million bucks in cap space, depending on where you look, between 28 and 30. We'll get into some of the guys they could, in theory, go throw some money at in those situations. But I think the options out there in free agency are pretty slim. And so things are trending towards, if the reporting is that Bruce Brown's going to get picked up, that would seem to signal that the intention is probably to sign Gary Trent Jr. to something as well. Obviously he's an unrestricted free agent. He can go walk anywhere and sign with any team, but I do think other teams around the league will have higher priorities than signing Gary Trent Jr., who, for all the reasons the Raptors might have, a moment of pause about signing him, a lot of other teams would have that same moment of pause of, hey, like, can we get this kind of player on the minimum or a biannual exception and not spend a big chunk of our salary cap space on Gary Trent Jr. in a summer where we have cap space to add? Is that really the best use of our cap space as a resource? All very interesting questions. I do think things are trending right now, though, towards Gary Trent Jr. just making sense for him to come back and play for the Toronto Raptors. We'll get into why that might not be such a bad thing, both in the case of Gary Trent Jr. and Bruce Brown, if they can't find a trade for him. We'll talk about the free agent class and sort of the options as opposed to keeping those two guys coming up in just 1 second as we continue our reset of the Bruce Brown and Gary Trent Jr. situations coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. And look, sometimes you just got to have someone to talk to. It really is that simple. Having someone who doesn't have an agenda, who's unbiased in your life, who is a professional, who is there to listen and offer feedback is a wonderful thing. Getting stressors off your chest is an important thing. You can't let stuff build up. If you're letting things in your life build up, that's not going to lead to a happy life. That's not going to make you the best person you can be for the people in your life and all of that. You're not going to make decisions in line with your values, but having someone who can be someone who you just talk to and they take what you say, take what they know about you, take your values and what you want to achieve in life and help you come up with solutions to life's problems, whether they're big or small. It's a beautiful thing. Again, obviously therapy valuable for people who've gone through major trauma, but also life just throws little bits of annoyance and concern and worry and all this stuff at you day to day. Therapy can be the thing that helps guide you through all of that. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapist, that is, with any time or at any time for no additional charge. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. Back at it here with your first listen today. Thanks so much for being here. To the everydayers out there, you're all the very, very best. A reminder, Locked On Sports Today 24/7 is your all-day streaming channel on YouTube. You can go and check out Locked On shows covering the biggest stories in sports all the live long day. Of course, the NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Finals coming up this week. You got Mavericks, you've got Celtics, you've got Panthers, you've got Oilers, all running those local shows all the time over on Locked On Sports Today 24/7, plus all the other stuff you like. Our national shows, local shows, it's beautiful. Go check it out and, make use of your day, would you? Okay, let's continue on here. The sort of Bruce Brown, Gary Trent Jr. reset. And look, in a different world, in a different free agency climate, in a different offseason with different players available, keeping Bruce Brown around and trying to trade him and picking up that option and re-signing Gary Trent Jr. might not be the number one option for the Raptors, right? Again, we've talked about the imperfections of Gary Trent Jr. Bruce Brown, it was a tough go in Toronto after the trade. I don't know if that's entirely representative of Bruce Brown, the player. We can get into that in a little bit here, but overall, this is just a summer where the options are not as good as they typically might be. Maybe that goes on the front office a little bit for kind of misreading things and saying, "Oh, cap space, we've got that. That's going to be our ticket to more good players this summer." I don't know if that was their thinking or if they've ever really intended to go the cap space route. But if it was, and they were really hoping to go score big this summer, it seems like maybe a misread of the market, which is something the Raptors front office has maybe been guilty of in recent years. So you could forgive me for being a little worried about maybe that being a thing here. But overall, I think the path forward here, it's not like a disaster if Gary Trent Jr. sticks around, if there's not an upgrade to be found on the wings in the offseason. I think there's still a lot to like about this team. I think Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickly, RJ Barrett, all very exciting. Jakob Poeltl, rock solid. Grady Dick, I'm really excited about year 2 of him and how he continues to grow, considering the meteoric rise he had from barely playable in the G League to, actually pretty decent NBA player by the end of the season. So yeah, back to Bruce and Gary. The options out there are just slim, man. We've gone over through them over the last couple of weeks, right? Playing our little game, pulling names from bowls, and so many of these names are uninspiring, especially the free agent ones, right? If you're looking at the wing, you're looking at Caleb Martin, you're looking at Najee Marshall. I don't know, not super sexy to me. Maybe you can talk yourself into Caleb Martin. I'm actually kind of worried about that contract for whoever signs it, just because of, the post Miami Heat, Eric Spoelstra pixie dust thing that seems to maybe follow some guys who leave. Not all, Max Strus totally fine with the Cavs, for example, but it's a tough thing. Like, where does the Miami Heat influence end and Caleb Martin's goodness start? It's a tough line to find. When it comes to Najee Marshall, I think he's probably best as a backup wing. I don't think you want to be starting him by any means. And I don't think you're throwing cap space at him. You could probably sign him anyway if you keep Brown and Trent and just offer a part of the mid-level to him and see what he says. Maybe he takes it. Who knows? But just because of the lack of options and because the options that I think are the best ones are the highest risk ones that might not pan out, I think that kind of leads me again to feeling like it's actually the right move to just keep Bruce Brown around, try to trade him. If you can't trade him, keep him on the team and just keep Gary Trent Jr. around for a few more seasons on whatever contract he's going to get. And maybe Gary Trent Jr. is looking at like maybe a shorter deal, right? The cap's going up. Maybe in a couple of years, he sees an opportunity to actually get paid in a way it feels like he thought he might last summer or that he thought he might this summer before the market kind of set him up into the spot where he's maybe not the most desirable guy in the world. And there's just not a ton of cap space teams out there at any given time, right? So there's only so many guys who can go walk into teams' cap space. Free agency's dead, baby. But yeah, the biggest sort of idealist, okay, the Raptors go and get those guys, and that's like a really good use of their cap space, and they fit the timeline and all that, are two guys we talked about yesterday, Isaac Okoro and Patrick Williams. I think are probably the two guys where it's like, okay, if they could make that happen and get them on the team, that's a pretty good use of the cap space route, and you kind of make your peace with Gary walking and Bruce Brown either being declined or traded well before cap space becomes a thing. That said, when you trade him, you got to bring back salary. So that's probably a non-starter anyway, unless you're getting some kind of weird non-guaranteed contract in return. Either way, when it comes to the like Isaac Okoro and Patrick Williams, like Patrick Williams in particular, I would absolutely love on this team. Again, I'm pretty high on there being more for him to give in a non-Chicago Bulls context. And maybe I'm wrong, but like dudes who are 6'7", 6'8", who shoot 40% from three and can defend multiple positions, they don't fall off of trees. Grow on trees, fall both, I suppose. Like they're not just like easily found in the NBA. And if you throw an offer sheet at Patrick Williams with your cap space that makes the Bulls think twice and he's on your team, like I think that's like pretty good use of your offseason. That said, like RFA is just so bloody risky, and it's even more risky now that it's only a 24-hour period you have to wait to match. It's not this 7-day thing where you totally handcuff a team when you say, hey, offer sheets out there, 7 days to match, and they have all this time to ruminate and think, and their cap space is tied up, your cap space is tied up. It's a little easier for a team to kind of sort through the will they or won't they of it. And in most cases, teams are just going to match, right? Unless the deal is super punitive to them. So I think it's probably too risky for the plan with the cap space to be go try to sign an RFA. And the UFA class just is not very good. And so, and it's full of guys who you could probably get with the mid-level anyway. I talked about Caleb Martin, Najee Marshall as the sort of two main examples there. If you're looking for wing upgrades, trading Bruce Brown is one of those options, right? Like that's another way to go try to find a guy. We talked about DeAndre Hunter, for example. He's interesting to me. The guys on the Nets, I think the Nets are kind of an interesting Bruce Brown team, non-contender class. We'll talk about contenders with Bruce coming up. But when it comes to teams that are in the non-contender class, talked about the Hawks and DeAndre Hunter. That one feels like it might have to be a three-teamer because I'm not really sure what use the Hawks would have for Bruce Brown. Maybe they have different designs than I envision for them, but I don't quite see the fit there. But the Nets are a team that I'm kind of circling. The Nets have their books set up so that 2025 is going to be their big cap space summer where they can go and try to not screw that up like they did with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and just go try to sign a guy into their space. We're New York, right? We're sort of New York. Come over here. We love you. Well, please sign with us. We're super desperate. We have nothing else to lean on. That seems to be their pretty obvious intention here. And so could you convince them to give you Cam Johnson or Dorian Finney-Smith plus like another salary in there to match in exchange for Bruce Brown? No pick attachment at all. They just get Bruce Brown off the books in a year, a guy they know, a guy who's been on that team, who comes off the books in a year and just helps them have more cap space to work with in a year. I think that's a pretty interesting one. And a Dorian Finney-Smith or Cam Johnson, while not perfect, would be a nice stopgap at the very least on the wings for the Raptors going forward. So, I think, again, keeping Bruce Brown and trading him allows you to examine those wing options as opposed to the free agent ones, which just are not very good. Again, the decision seems to be made because the free agent class is it's not a good one unless you're going to go sign OG Anunoby. And again, fingers crossed for the long con of this being Masai Ujiri's full-on magnum opus move where he gets the guys who perfectly assemble a team that OG Anunoby can then lift up upon returning in free agency. What a beautiful thing it would be. It's not happening, but one can hope. One can be stupid and delusional in the offseason. That's just the way to be. But barring that, I think the way you go and address the wing problem is way more via keeping Bruce Brown around and trading him than it is to hope you can sign someone into cap space. It's just kind of the way it is. And so when it comes to the Bruce Brown thing, like, I should say, like, if Bruce is on the team next year, it's not a disaster. I think there's this sort of kind of dumb discourse about Bruce Brown and how he played for the Raptors this season. I think he's a niche player. He's a guy who needs to fill a role. And the Raptors were in absolute disrepair after they traded for him, where they had injuries, obviously, for the last month and a half of the season. And they were, flirting with trading him for the first couple weeks he was on the team. That's got to be hard for a guy to deal with. The team never made any sense. They never found a role for him. And I think there are ways to use Bruce Brown more effectively than the Raptors did. Just because the Raptors didn't find a way to weaponize the things Bruce Brown does well within their team doesn't mean that they can't do it. They didn't have their team. This was a non-representative finish to the year of what the actual team context is. And I think there are ways to use Bruce Brown more effectively. I think, number one, what is the thing he's always been really good at? He's been sort of this like wizard of being a small guy who can screen and dive and make plays on the short roll. Use him in second units, have him screen and dive. You have the spacing option now with Kelly Olynyk and Grady Dick. If you have Emmanuel quickly in those lineups, for example, that's pretty interesting. You put some space around Bruce Brown on the short roll, and he can make things happen for you. That is a place he's been super successful playing with good players in recent seasons, both with the Nuggets when they won the championship and he was a core piece, and with the Brooklyn Nets playing with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden. Like, he can be a connector for good players. The Raptors don't have players of Nikola Jokic or Kevin Durant's ilk on this team right now, but they sure hope they do in Scotty Barnes. And going forward, like if Bruce Brown is just on the team next season, he can be a helpful agent for development, for getting this thing to where they want to go. Even if he's not a long-term piece on this team, if you can't go and get an upgrade for him via trade, and the declining him and going for the free agent route doesn't really work for you, which I don't think it is, there are worse things than having Bruce Brown, a very competent NBA player, on the team next year, on top of keeping Gary Trent Jr. in concert with that, using your 2 draft picks and going and using your mid-level exception. Maybe you split it between 2 guys or sign 1 guy, and all of a sudden you have like 12 rotation players in the NBA, or what you hope becomes 12 by the end of the season with the rookies you have coming in. Like, there are worse ways to go into a season than to have a bunch of pretty okay players. And I think Bruce Brown certainly is a pretty okay player. And I think there are ways to use him better just with a team context that makes more sense, which they hopefully can procure over the summer. And I just think it will be a better context than they had, because they're not going to be all injured and missing time for personal tragedies like they were for much of the time Bruce Brown was on the team. And by the way, Bruce Brown was like pretty solid down the stretch numbers wise. 11, 4, and 4 on 36 or 7% from deep. Like, there's a player there. And I think if he's on the team, if they can't find a trade for him this summer, it's totally fine. We'll come back on the other side, get into what teams to watch when it comes to who could use Bruce Brown. I think a lot of teams could. And it might be that, like, they can fetch more than you think for Bruce Brown. Maybe it's less than you think. I think anyone who pretends to know what Bruce Brown's actual market is lying and talking out of their butt. We're going to get into that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the single best sportsbook in all the land. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more with just a single winning $5 bet. And you can use that on the very easy-to-use FanDuel app to go and bet on whatever you want to bet on. And look, I often advocate for the happiness hedge. Hard to do in this NBA Finals because both teams winning would make me personally sad, but I would slightly prefer the Mavericks to win. I feel like 95% of basketball fans, non-Boston division, want the Mavericks to win. And so why not bet on the Mavericks to lose, so that if they lose and the stupid Celtics win the title, you at least get some money out of it to make you feel a little bit better for your trouble. That's my recommendation. Happiness hedge all day. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on your Wednesday edition of Locked On Raptors, closing things out, talking about Bruce Brown and what teams to keep an eye on who could, especially teams in the draft order, who could potentially be teams that might use the services of one Bruce Brown. Before we do that, just a reminder, we'll have Jamar Hines on the show tomorrow. Very excited for that. We'll have some fun there, as we usually do with Jamar. And then Will Lou is coming on Friday. We'll get to do a big picture talk about the offseason as a whole and where we want things to go, with our pal Will, who of course is now the co-host of the new Hello and Welcome podcast. We're very excited to have that, to be back part of the Raptors podcasting sphere or whatever. And look, they are the sphere. They're the big boys, but whatever. We love Will. He's going to be on the podcast. Very, very excited about that. Teams that could use Bruce Brown. Look, I think we saw firsthand this year, and the Denver Nuggets losing in the second round might actually help indirectly kind of inform this. We saw that the Nuggets strategy of drafting late in the first round rookies and hoping they can contribute in year one and be players, it's just a tough road to walk if you're a contender. It's really hard for rookies to be good in year one. You maybe get one or two a year who pop and are providing valuable winning minutes for good teams. Derek Lively, obviously, the main example here. We cannot start assuming that every Derek Lively, like everyone is Derek Lively, right? Like, this is just not how it works. So very often rookies are bad for the first couple seasons. And so if you're counting on late first round picks to be the guys who fill out your rotation and make it so you can go win a championship, I think it's a pretty tough bet to make unless you have like 9-10 guys. And in the modern NBA, like not a lot of teams have 9-10 guys they can lean on because it's just too bloody expensive to have that. So when it comes to Bruce Brown, like he is going to be more helpful to a contender next season than 95 to 100% of the rookies who will be drafted in this sort of range of the draft, back half of the first round, let's say. That's just the fact. He is someone who just 12 months ago was playing closing minutes in NBA Finals games for the literal NBA champions. He is a good player. He is a player who contenders covet. And, you know, they may not show it with big, sexy offers, but if you polled any contender, would you like Bruce Brown on your team? They'd say, yeah, he'd be great on the team. What does it cost? Obviously, that's the consideration here. But yeah, Bruce Brown will be awesome on this team. He fits a lot of teams, even though he's an imperfect three-point shooter, et cetera, et cetera. He's a good connector. He adds a little bit of supplemental ball handling. We know what Bruce Brown's all about. And so, yeah, I think the margin for getting cute with, okay, we can just take this guy and he's going to help us next year is pretty slim for these contenders. And when you're a contender, like, windows don't last forever. The Boston Celtics being good for as long as they have is the exception, not the rule. Windows do not stay open forever in the NBA. Guys age, you know, interpersonal dynamics take over. Weird things happen. Guys get hurt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Guys leave because their contract is up. Short contracts in the NBA. It's a lot of flux, a lot of chaos, and you can't just like bank on, oh, our window's going to be open for the next 5 years. We don't have to worry about getting good players on our team. We'll just get rookies and they'll be good right away. You might squander away your remaining years of your window if you don't go and get players who can help now. And so I do think there's an argument to be made that any team that has designs on winning a championship in the back part of the first round, who is looking around and sort of thinking about how they can, you know, improve their team, they should be looking at Bruce Brown. They really should. And in this draft where it seems like there's all sorts of reports about the Sixers and the Knicks and the Lakers and all these teams maybe not wanting their picks in the first round because of the quote unquote quality of this draft. Although I do think it's been pretty clear that the sort of back part of this draft is the place you want to be. Picking up at the high end with the high salary slots for non-star guys. Yeah, I understand not wanting to pick there. I sure as hell didn't want to pick there when the Raptors had the chance to, or the possibility of doing that. And so, you know, but the back part of the draft, I do think there's a real case that if you're a contender, you should be looking to trade your picks to go and land players who can help you right now to amplify your window, to bolster your chances of winning next season. And Bruce Brown might be one of the best sort of championship edition guys available on the market this summer. So again, like I mentioned it before the break, I think there's been this sort of assumption that Bruce Brown's going to net the Raptors nothing in trade. I don't think that's true. Just because he didn't get a first round pick at the deadline doesn't mean that he can't do that at some point. Teams' needs change and situations change. The landscape changes all the time. And maybe it doesn't come this summer. Maybe it's something towards next year's deadline where a first round pick is in play because he's closer to free agency. He's going to be a rental, and maybe he's that last piece to put a team over the top. There's more contracts that are available to be traded and stuff like that, you know, that have been signed through another transaction window, yada, yada, yada. But long way of saying, there are some teams I think are worth keeping an eye on when it comes to the Bruce Brown thing. And this is just me kind of putting two and two together. This is not any sort of sourced reporting. This is not even using any reporting that's out because there's not a whole lot of reporting right now out on Bruce Brown. But if you look at the draft order, you look where teams sit, you look at, you know, the potential salary matching that could be had. There are a few teams I think make sense. The Sixers would be one, and there's like I guess a way this can happen, but the Sixers are one because it's like they don't have like the salaries to send back. They have like 2 players signed for next year. It's like Joel Embiid and like 3 humps, and then they'll sign Tyrese Maxey once they do all the order of operations stuff. But they don't have guys to trade, so that's not going to be like you get salaries back for Bruce Brown. But it could be something where maybe they absorb him into cap space. That's a possibility. The Sixers pick at number 16 in this draft. So maybe that's a little rich for their blood. That's possible. They have the 41st pick as well. I don't know if there's something there. Late second round, probably not where you want to trade for Bruce Brown either. I'd rather just have Bruce Brown on the team than a second round pick. But Philly's a team sort of on the fringes. I don't know if it totally makes sense, but if they align their offseason in a way that makes sense, there's a world in which they could absorb him if they don't go get Paul George, things like that. If they go sort of smaller additions around Maxey and Embiid, that could be one. I think the Lakers are interesting. I think Bruce Brown, I think he was linked towards him in a lot of rumors and stuff last year. I think that's something you keep an eye on. And the Lakers pick at number 17 in this year's draft, and they have 2 contracts that I'm not sure how keen they're on like having on their books. Frankly, they've got Jared Vanderbilt and they've got Gabe Vincent, who's got 2 more years at around $11 million after signing last year and barely playing this past season. Could you get Jared Vanderbilt and Gabe Vincent? I don't think that's like a perfect return for the Raptors by any means, but if you're getting the pick attached to kind of take back that Vincent contract, maybe that is enough, right? I mean, that seems rich, 2 guys and a pick for Bruce Brown, but Bruce Brown fits that team, and he, again, would sort of give them some more flexibility in a year when he's off the books. You don't have the Vincent contract. The Lakers obviously value flexibility. They're kind of in this sort of weird year-to-year situation, like they're like on a lease with LeBron James as to when things are going to end there and what their future looks like. Maybe they want to clear the decks a little bit. I don't know. I'm just kind of inferring from their situation. That could be one. Jared Vanderbilt doesn't play high leverage minutes for them. You can't really play him in the playoffs because he can't shoot at all. And, he'd be fine on the Raptors, not like a core piece or anything like that. He'd maybe just be like a Chris Boucher replacement if you find a move for Chris Boucher. But the Lakers stand out as a team that could be kind of in the mix here. The Kings are fascinating to me because they have Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter, $18 million for Barnes, 16 or so for Huerter. I think the math could work, or you throw another little salary in there and can make it work. Where there's a will, there's a way with trades. I don't worry about the exact dollar to dollar matching. You can figure it out. But Harrison Barnes just straight up for Bruce Brown. Maybe I'm crazy. I know Harrison Barnes is like kind of over the hill a little bit. He's like the Kings have been seeking a replacement for him for what it seems like forever, but he's like a useful player and he fits a need for the Raptors. He shoots threes. He's like a good dude. He's on the other contract for 2 more seasons at 18, then 19. You could do worse than Harrison Barnes as kind of a stopgap wing who eventually maybe uses salary down the line to go and trade before he becomes a free agent as well in a bigger deal to upgrade on the wing. Like, I would not be upset with that. You're not getting maybe the Kings pick 13th in the draft. I doubt you're getting that pick out of them, but hey, crazier things have happened. Vivek Ranadive is like ready to not extend Mike Brown. Who knows? That front office is whack. That ownership is whack. I would give the Kings a call. I think I'd prefer Barnes to Huerter just because of the positional need and all of that, but you could talk me into Huerter as well. And I think those are the teams that kind of stand out. Denver would be great. I think, there were rumors that they wanted to try to find a way to get him last year at the deadline, but it just didn't work salary wise. And they have a similar salary conundrum this summer on top of also needing to try to keep Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. So it'd have to be like Zeke Nagy plus like a bunch of little contracts thrown in. I don't think that's all that realistic. They pick in the back part of the draft as well at number 28. It's not like there's a total wealth of options. Of course, the Knicks were rumored heavily with Bruce Brown. Maybe they revisit that. They have picks 24 and 25. So maybe there's something there with the salary they want to offload, although they have fewer of those with Evan Fournier coming off the books. But those are the teams I think to keep an eye on with Bruce Brown. Like there's going to be a team out there that says that guy is a piece for us to kind of put us over the top. Maybe it doesn't happen this summer, but if you pick up the option, like I think they should do, it could happen next year at the deadline. And, it's a delayed return on what you could get for Bruce Brown, but you also get Bruce Brown actually playing for your basketball team for the first few months of next season, which again, I think can be a valuable thing too. That'll do it for this. I feel like I've waxed and waned along enough about Bruce Brown and Gary Trent Jr., but we will come back tomorrow and we'll revisit some other stuff. I'm not exactly sure we'll talk about with Jamar yet. We'll have some fun though, because I like to play little games with Jamar and get his head, get him firing quick and stuff like that with little games I throw at him. So we'll continue on with that. obviously we'll do on Friday. Very much looking forward to that. Until then, thank you so much for subscribing, following, rating, reviewing, supporting the show. However you support the show, very much appreciate anyone who rocks with it and does any kind of support, whether on the apps or on YouTube. And thank you, as always, for tuning in. Find me at Woodley Sean on the Hell website. Find the Discord, link in the description for you to join. And we'll talk to you again on Thursday for another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye. I'm way off.